The trap. The door of the garret had just opened abruptly, and allowed a view of 3 men clad in blue linen blouses, and masked with masks of black paper. The first was thin, and had a long, iron-tipped cudgel. The second, who was a sort of colossus, carried, by the middle of the handle, with the blade downward, a butcher's pole axe for slaughtering cattle. The third, a man with thick-set shoulders, not so slender as the first, held in his hand an enormous key stolen from the door of some prison. It appeared that the arrival of these men was what Jondrette had been waiting for. A rapid dialogue ensued between him and the man with the cudgel, the thin one. "Is everything ready?" said Jondrette. "Yes," replied the thin man. "Where is Montparnasse?" The young principal actor stopped to chat with your girl. "Which?" "The eldest." "Is there a carriage at the door?" "Yes." "Is the team harnessed?" "Yes." "With 2 good horses?" "Excellent." "Is it waiting where I ordered?" "Yes." "Good," said Jondrette. Leblanc was very pale. He was scrutinizing everything around him in the den, like a man who understands what he has fallen into. And his head, directed in turn toward all the heads which surrounded him, moved on his neck with an astonished and attentive slowness, but there was nothing in his air which resembled fear. He had improvised an entrenchment out of the table. And the man, who but an instant previously had borne merely the appearance of a kindly old man, had suddenly become a sort of athlete, and placed his robust fist on the back of his chair, with a formidable and surprising gesture. This old man, who was so firm and so brave in the presence of such a danger, seemed to possess one of those natures which are as courageous as they are kind, both easily and simply. The father of a woman whom we love is never a stranger to us. Marius felt proud of that unknown man. 3 of the men, of whom Jondrette had said, "They are chimney builders," had armed themselves from the pile of old iron. One with a heavy pair of shears, the second with weighing tongs, the third with a hammer, and had placed themselves across the entrance without uttering a syllable. The old man had remained on the bed, and had merely opened his eyes. The Jondrette woman had seated herself beside him. Marius decided that in a few seconds more the moment for intervention would arrive. And he raised his right hand towards the ceiling, in the direction of the corridor, in readiness to discharge his pistol. Jondrette, having terminated his colloquy with the man with the cudgel, turned once more to Leblanc, and repeated his question, accompanying it with that low, repressed, and terrible laugh which was peculiar to him. "So you do not recognize me?" Leblanc looked him full in the face, and replied, "No." Then Jondrette advanced to the table. He leaned across the candle, crossing his arms, putting his angular and ferocious jaw close to Leblanc's calm face, and advancing as far as possible without forcing Leblanc to retreat, and, in this posture of a wild beast who is about to bite, he exclaimed, "My name is not Fabantou. My name is not Jondrette. My name is Thénardier. I am the innkeeper of Montfermeil. Do you understand? Thénardier, now do you know me?" An almost imperceptible flush crossed Leblanc's brow, and he replied with a voice which neither trembled nor rose above its ordinary level, with his accustomed placidity. "No more than before." Marius did not hear this reply. Anyone who had seen him at that moment through the darkness would have perceived that he was haggard, stupid, thunderstruck. At the moment when Jondrette said, "My name is Thénardier," Marius had trembled in every limb, and had leaned against the wall, as though he felt the cold of a steel blade through his heart. Then his right arm, all ready to discharge the signal shot, dropped slowly, and at the moment when Jondrette repeated, "Thénardier, do you understand?" Marius's faltering fingers had come near letting the pistol fall. Jondrette, by revealing his identity, had not moved M. Leblanc, but he had quite upset Marius. That name of Thénardier, with which M. Leblanc did not seem to be acquainted, Marius knew well. Let the reader recall what that name meant to him. That name he had worn on his heart, inscribed in his father's testament. He bore it at the bottom of his mind, in the depths of his memory, in that sacred injunction. A certain Thénardier saved my life. If my son encounters him, he will do him all the good that lies in his power. That name, it will be remembered, was one of the pieties of his soul. He mingled it with the name of his father in his worship. What? This man was that Thénardier, that innkeeper of Montfermeil whom he had so long and so vainly sought. He had found him at last, and how? His father's savior was a ruffian. That man, to whose service Marius was burning to devote himself, was a monster. That liberator of Colonel Pontmercy was on the point of committing a crime whose scope Marius did not, as yet, clearly comprehend, but which resembled an assassination. And against whom, great God! What a fatality! What a bitter mockery of fate! His father had commanded him from the depths of his coffin to do all the good in his power to this Thénardier. And for 4 years Marius had cherished no other thought than to acquit this debt of his father's. And at the moment when he was on the eve of having a brigand seized in the very act of crime by justice, destiny cried to him. This is Thénardier. He could at last repay this man for his father's life, saved amid a hail-storm of grape shot on the heroic field of Waterloo, and repay it with the scaffold. He had sworn to himself that if ever he found that Thénardier, he would address him only by throwing himself at his feet. And now he actually had found him, but it was only to deliver him over to the executioner. His father said to him, "Succor Thénardier," and he replied to that adored and sainted voice by crushing Thénardier. He was about to offer to his father in his grave the spectacle of that man who had torn him from death at the peril of his own life. Executed on the place Saint-Jacques through the means of his son, of that Marius to whom he had entrusted that man by his will. And what a mockery to have so long worn on his breast his father's last commands, written in his own hand, only to act in so horribly contrary a sense. But, on the other hand, now look on that trap and not prevent it. Condemn the victim and to spare the assassin. Could one be held to any gratitude towards so miserable a wretch? All the ideas which Marius had cherished for the last 4 years were pierced through and through, as it were, by this unforeseen blow. He shuddered. Everything depended on him. Unknown to themselves, he held in his hand all those beings who were moving about there before his eyes. If he fired his pistol, M. Leblanc was saved, and Thénardier lost. If he did not fire, M. Leblanc would be sacrificed, and, who knows, Thénardier would escape. Should he dash down the one or allow the other to fall? Remorse awaited him in either case. What was he to do? What should he choose? Be false to the most imperious souvenirs, to all those solemn vows to himself, to the most sacred duty, to the most venerated text? Should he ignore his father's testament, or allow the perpetration of a crime? On the one hand, it seemed to him that he heard his Ursule supplicating for her father, and on the other, the colonel commending Thénardier to his care. He felt that he was going mad. His knees gave way beneath him. And he had not even the time for deliberation. so great was the fury with which the scene before his eyes was hastening to its catastrophe. It was like a whirlwind of which he had thought himself the master, and which was now sweeping him away. He was on the verge of swooning. In the meantime, Thénardier, whom we shall henceforth call by no other name, was pacing up and down in front of the table in a sort of frenzy and wild triumph. He seized the candle in his fist, and set it on the chimney-piece with so violent a bang that the wick came near being extinguished, and the tallow bespattered the wall. Then he turned to M. Leblanc with a horrible look, and spit out these words: "Done for. Smoked brown. Cooked. Spitchcocked. ... And again he began to march back and forth, in full eruption. "Ah!" he cried, "Sir, I've found you again at last, Mr. Philanthropist. Mr. Threadbare Millionaire. Mr. Giver of Dolls. You old ninny. Ah! So you don't recognize me? No, it wasn't you who came to Montfermeil, to my inn, 8 years ago, on Christmas Eve, 1823. It wasn't you who carried off that Fantine's child from me. The lark. It wasn't you who had a yellow greatcoat. No. Nor a package of duds in your hand, as you had this morning here. Say, wife, it seems to be his mania to carry packets of woolen stockings into houses. Old charity monger, get out with you. Are you a hosier, Mr. Millionaire? You give away your stock in trade to the poor, holy man. What bosh. Merry Andrew. Ah, and you don't recognize me. Well, I recognize you, that I do. I recognized you the very moment you poked your snout in here. Ah, you'll find out presently that it isn't all roses to thrust yourself in that fashion into people's houses, under the pretext that they are taverns, in wretched clothes, with the air of a poor man, to whom one would give a sou, to deceive persons, to play the generous, to take away their means of livelihood, and to make threats in the woods. And you can't call things quits, because afterwards, when people are ruined, you bring a coat that is too large, and 2 miserable hospital blankets, you old blackguard, you child stealer. ... He paused, and seemed to be talking to himself for a moment. One would have said that his wrath had fallen into some hole, like the Rhone. Then, as though he were concluding aloud the things which he had been saying to himself in a whisper, he smote the table with his fist, and shouted. And with his goody-goody air. And, apostrophizing M. Leblanc. Parbleu! You made game of me in the past. You are the cause of all my misfortunes. For 1,500 francs you got a girl whom I had, and who certainly belonged to rich people, and who had already brought in a great deal of money, and from whom I might have extracted enough to live on all my life. A girl who would have made up to me for everything that I lost in that vile cook-shop, where there was nothing but one continual row, and where, like a fool, I ate up my last farthing. Oh, I wish all the wine folks drank in my house had been poison to those who drank it. Well, never mind. Say, now, you must have thought me ridiculous when you went off with the lark. You had your cudgel in the forest. You were the stronger. Revenge. I'm the one to hold the trumps today. You're in a sorry case, my good fellow. Oh, but I can laugh. Really, I laugh. Didn't he fall into the trap? I told him that I was an actor. That my name was Fabantou. That I had played comedy with Mamselle Mars. With Mamselle Muha. That my landlord insisted on being paid tomorrow, the 4th of February, and he didn't even notice that the 8th of January, and not the 4th of February is the time when the quarter runs out. Absurd idiot. And the 4 miserable Philippes which he has brought me. Scoundrel. He hadn't the heart even to go as high as 100 francs. And how he swallowed my platitudes. That did amuse me. I said to myself, blockhead. Come, I've got you. I lick your paws this morning, but I'll gnaw your heart this evening. Single quote. Thénardier paused. He was out of breath. His little, narrow chest panted like a forged bellows. His eyes were full of the ignoble happiness of a feeble, cruel, and cowardly creature, which finds that it can, at last, harass what it has feared, and insult what it has flattered. The joy of a dwarf who should be able to set his heel on the head of Goliath. The joy of a jackal which is beginning to rend a sick bull, so nearly dead that he can no longer defend himself, but sufficiently alive to suffer still. M. Leblanc did not interrupt him, but said to him when he paused, I do not know what you mean to say. You are mistaken in me. I am a very poor man, and anything but a millionaire. I do not know you. You are mistaking me for some other person.